Brilliant. All right. So what I want to share before I get started on what I had scheduled to do is about baking. I was baking bread, and I bake bread fairly regularly. And once upon a time, I do it now in the bread machine, which does help quite a lot. It's kind of fun, but it takes out a lot of the manual side of it. But still, and once upon a time, I used to bake bread every day by hand from scratch, kneading and doing all that. But the point I want to make is about the connection between baking and how we process things in our lives, right? So when we take this example of baking, what happens when I bake? Right, I have to first get together the ingredients and then I put them together. Now, if you come and look at my bread machine, after I've put all the ingredients into the bread pan, it's like a long vertical bread pan. If you open the machine just before it starts and you looked in there and you say, "Oh, what are you doing?" Well, I'm making bread. But if I don't say what am I doing, you don't know what I'm doing. You just look in there. All you're going to see really is flour with maybe a little bit of something on top of it. Like, oh, well, I guess you're making some kind of flavored flour. Right? If you have no clue about baking, what the machine is, let's assume you like an alien and you look inside the machine, well, it's making flavored flour because you're going to see the yeast on top because you're going to add the yeast on top of the flour, just the way so it mixes, right? But you won't necessarily see the sugar and the salt that's there, which is very necessary. You're not going to see the milk and the water and the butter that's underneath the flour, right? So you won't know what's going on because you're making an assumption too early, right? So this is very, very important. And this happens with our thinking. And that's the point that I'm making here about our thinking and how we process awareness and how we can jump to conclusions and assume things based on what we just perceive initially because we're too hasty to make these perceptions and look more closely and understand what's going on, right? So very easy to misunderstand. But now there's a massive problem here, right? Here comes Sher. Wonderful, 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 wonderful. I may have to start my story again. I hope you're still with us, Jason. I hope you're still with us. Brilliant. You are. Wonderful, wonderful. All right. So please ask questions as we go along, Jason. I will respond. There's a little bit of a delay, 30 seconds, but still, I will respond. No problem. Please ask. All right. Hello, Sher. Hello. I'm glad you're here. Jessica will not be. She got called into a meeting with one of the bosses there. So very cool. Very cool. So I said, have fun. Hello, Sher. Oh, Sher's connecting to audio. I'm chatting and Sher can't hear me. Oh, well. I'm Jason. I'm just holding for a second because I want to recap what I'm saying with Sher and go over this. So hello, yes, Sher. Hello. Wonderful. Oh, I'm glad he is, Sher. Did he, Sher? Jessica won't be here. She got called in for a meeting with one of the bosses. So you hear me, Sher?
Yeah, I
I
can
hear
hear
you.
you.
Brilliant. Okay. So did you hear what I was starting to say about baking?
No.
No. All right. So I'll start again. So I'm using baking as, sorry, Jason, anybody else listening, just is what it is. I want Sher in on this conversation here. I'm using baking as an analogy for how we think and how we come to decisions, how we process decisions, and so on, right? And how we process information. In other words, to use baking as an analogy for awareness, discernment, and understanding. So I was making bread in my bread machine, and the bread machine is that vertical pan, right? And I don't know if you've used the bread machine. I'm kind of assuming, or at least you're familiar. And so what happens is you put in all the wet ingredients first, and then you put the dry on top of it, and the flour, and then you put the salt and the sugar and the yeast and whatever else. Right? And that kind
Hmm.
of goes last on top. And you're going to make like a little hole for it, like a little volcano, put it in there. Anyway, if somebody comes in who has no idea what you do, never seen a bread machine before, not aware of bread making, like an alien, and they open up the bread machine before it starts, you just put in the ingredient, you haven't started yet, and they say, they don't even, they're just trying to figure out what you're doing. And they look inside there, oh, well, I see flour, and I recognize flour, and I see a bit of stuff on top of it. I don't know what that is, some kind of spice, I would assume. So you're making flavored flour. All right. That's what they could jump to the conclusion with. if they aren't discerning, right? Well, if they're a discerning alien, it's, well, I have no idea. I better find out and see what's going on here and wait a little bit and get more information, right? But if they're not discerning, they might jump to the conclusion, well, I see flour and it's got some kind of spice or something on it. Must be, flavored flowers. Like, well, duh. And they just quite happily assume that this perception of theirs is the truth. Right. I'm mentioning this because this happens so often. People jump to a conclusion and then this is their reality. Now we get a real problem after this, because that decision of theirs, this awareness, this perception, this influences. Brilliant. Hello, Norma. Hello, Norma. I'm glad you're here, Jason. I'm glad you're with us. So marvelous, Norma too. So now this perception of this, which becomes a belief, and when they have inappropriate processing of beliefs, that belief to them becomes a fact. So it's a fact that you are making flavored flour, right? So as you go along and as the machine starts up and starts moving, well, they hear it churning and processing and this, it makes no difference to them because they can't really see what's going on in there. They just insist on believing with flour. And of course, eventually when you show them the bread, they, in the meantime, right, when in reef, little things that happen, they hear noises, they hear smells, it all is going to support this idea of this because it's a confirmation bias. And they take whatever they're perceiving, that smell. Oh, this is what flavored flour smells like. No, that's what bread smells like. But you see my point here, right? That bias that they jump to, that conclusion, it influences whatever comes after. However, if we have somebody who's a bit more sensible, then they are going to start baking this bread, right? And what happens when you bake bread? You put your ingredients together. What do you have to do next, sir? You have to mix it all together, right? You have
Oh,
to
yeah.
start kneading.
You're wetting. Yeah.
This is
Glad you're
what
wet to the
got
dry.
me. Say again?
I said, yeah, the wet to the dry.
Right, exactly. You have to knead it together. And this is what started me on this point that I'm making now, what jumped in my mind in the conclusion. It's when we were interacting in some way and something, or I know, I was just thinking about stuff and it came into my mind. So I said, you know what? Some kneading was required of the thinking as the step between when we grasp something and then when we express it. If we do it too quickly and we don't need that perception, then it comes out, well, when you don't thoroughly need something, you've got lumpiness, you've got, a bit of wet stuff, you got too much wet stuff in one spot, you got too much dry stuff in another spot, and well, it's just a mess, right? So we need to knead before we express, right? This is very, very, very critical. Right, so there's this gap between there, or before we even just start to process what we are taking in, we first need to knead those ingredients together. I just noticed this very particularly when people hear something and then they've got to either do a repeat back or a takeaway or even just say it verbatim back. You need to knead it a bit in order to be able to do this. So the kneading part, very, very clear. Otherwise, the stuff doesn't quite sit and work together. Then what we want to do, let's go a little bit further than this. Okay, in our bread analogy, what happens next after the kneading? You got to let it stand a little while. It's got to rise. Yes? Right, sure?
Yep.
All right. So let's take this in the analogy of our processing of new information, new awareness, new understanding. Right. So I need it together, but I can't just immediately want to say, oh, pop it out. I got it now. I got it now. No, sorry, you don't. You got to let it rise. You've got to let it rise. Okay, so then it rises up. Then what do? Well, then you come along and say, nope, and you give that rise a smack, and you pop that bubble of the rise, and you knead it all over again. Correct? Right. Why is this so critical in our thinking? Because we put those ingredients together and something rises out of it. And we assume this is the end product. And we get all excited. Wow, I've got bread, I've got whatever. No, this is just one form of it. You need to redo it again and let it come again because there's multiple ways this thing goes, right? And if you do it too quickly and you just let that rise, you're going to have kind of hollow and it's not going to work. So you need to be a bit more thorough, in other words, and give multiple chances for this processing, this rising to happen. So you can really get to the real juice of it. All right. So then you let it rise again. Then you put it in the oven, you knead it back down again, and you put it in the pan. And now you start the actual baking. So for those who don't bake bread, there's a lot of stuff that happens before the actual baking starts. Yeah? And this is my point. If we are too premature with baking, if your stuff isn't, first of all, mixed together appropriately, which is the kneading, then if it's not given a chance to rise, and then you got to re-knead it and rise again so that the rising can be in all of the dough and really properly rise. So in other words, that your awareness, your thinking, your understanding can fully, adequately mature. Then only comes the baking. Now, what is the baking equivalent? The baking equivalent, if we think of heat as stress, it's basically when you take your new awareness, your new understanding, and you apply it in some way. You practice it, you implement it, you give it a test. This is the equivalent of baking, right?
Well,
you want to make sure that you know what you know through self-proving, through testing, through application. Baking. Yes, sure?
okay, yes, I agree with
Right.
all that, and what you were saying. But there
Yeah.
was a point in there though. After we do the second kneading, you got to know how you're going to use it. What
Correct.
form are you going to shape it into? Is
Exactly.
it going to be a loaf of bread?
Exactly.
It can be muffins,
Exactly.
rolls, croissants.
Exactly.
How are you going to
Exactly.
use it?
Exactly.
Then you let it
Exactly.
rise again. Then we
Yeah.
bake it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Bina is in chat. And yes, please say hi if you're watching it live. Those highs make a very big difference. They are very important. So yes, exactly. After you do your kneading, you've got to decide what your intent is. You have to have clarity of intent. Then you've got to go and make sure that you don't just believe that you have a bread roll or a cake or a loaf or whatever you have. You can make the shape of it, but until you actually implement it, until you bake it, until you test it, it's not going to be real, right? It's going to be half baked. Now, half baked doesn't mean, well, that would be unbaked. That would just be flour. But if you actually see examples of half-baked goods, it's quite a mess, right? Sure. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it
like,
is.
oh
It is.
God, this is just terrible. In other words, if somebody didn't knead it properly, if they didn't let it rise properly, it's a mess. It's
Yeah.
I mean, I could use more colorful terminology to describe this, but it's an up of
Yeah.
some kind, right?
Yep.
So half-baked, when it comes to baking, this is not acceptable, not tolerated, and nobody's going to
No.
eat your half-baked food. As a matter of fact, you cannot eat it. It's inedible, right? So
Yeah.
half-baked does not work. That's why the expression half-baked is there, right? So when
Mm-hmm.
we apply this to our thinking, and particularly when it comes to the processing of new ideas and new awarenesses, it is essential that we don't be half-baked, because you can jump to that conclusion, oh, they're making flavored flour or whatever, and get it all wrong, and then confirmation bias comes in, and you never get to actually perceive what's going on. Plus, if you take it in, okay, let's say you do knead it and you do let it rise, but you don't actually bake it, which is the application, the expression, the testing of this new idea. If you don't apply it, don't use it, you're not really going to have the actual product at the end. You're going to think you've got it in your brain. Well, I'm looking at my pie over here, but I haven't baked it yet. Well, it's just an idea pie. It's not a real pie,
Yeah.
right? So in reality, when you don't actually bake your dough that's risen and shaped and everything, if you don't actually put it in the oven and bake it, it's useless. So that's the point. You can have all the awareness, discernment, understanding, which is the kneading and the rising and all of that, right? And the shaping it into what you want. That's the awareness, discernment, and understanding part. But the application is the baking part. So it's very key here, right? But I wanted to really emphasize that initial kneading, because it's a step we can so easily switch and not realize that, man, I've got a lot of stuff here and it's in the moment. Just to have that power pause, to pause a bit
Mm-hmm.
and knead the stuff and then express. Then you can go further into the other steps. Very, very powerful. Just something that grabbed me, right? All
Yeah.
right.
It's
So
amazing.
just a little aside, this is how I work and things, and this part of Way-of-Impeccability. When things come at us, you don't let it go. You go through to the end. You work it out, and there's always powerful value and moreness to these awarenesses and understandings, these connections, right? And to express
Yeah.
them the way I've done now too. Very, very, very powerful, very useful, right? Right, sir? You do this
Yes,
too. Yeah.
yes, I do.
It
I
just
do.
connects you. It connects you to yourself. It connects you to moreness. It's just a wonderful business. This is very cool. Very, very cool. All right.
Yes.
Sure. Anything to share before we go?
No, no. I just I'm here for the listening and for the learning
Yes.
and
Yes.
to
I love it.
understand.
I love it. I love it.
That's what
It's too more.
understanding,
Yes.
learning is, anyways. It's just
Yeah.
understanding. It's not gathering specific knowledge. It's just trying to
Correct.
understand what I already know.
Correct.
So
Correct. Correct. And also, this is a kind of a baking. Yes.
yeah, it is. And
Right.
in
Exactly.
actuality, it is. It takes
Exactly.
some of my
Exactly.
half-baked ideas and turns them into proper baking.
Exactly. 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 So this is very cool, that because it's a chance to you to connect to stuff to say, oh, you know what? Yes, you this. Oh, yeah. You know what? I haven't finished on that yet. It needs a bit more kneading. It needs a bit more rising. Whatever.
Yes.
Okay, maybe the dough's a bit dry, and I need to add a bit of water. I actually have a post about bread baking that comes from a different point of view, which I'm very tempted to share that now. But all right, it's about how 1 or 2 drops of water, adding it to your baking, to your bread or liquid, right? Just that tiny little bit of difference can make a huge difference. So when you start making bread, right, sure, and you when you're kneading it, you're doing it the old-fashioned way, and you get all the ingredients, and you start kneading. You say, man, this can't be enough liquid because it always seems to dry at first, right? But then as you knead, it
Yes.
comes out and the dough is the right texture. You always, it
Yes.
always seems like the water is too little in the recipe. And new
Yes.
people, new to baking, they assume it's too new and they add water and then they get the sloppy dough and it doesn't work, right? So
Right.
the point there is that things are enough, but you got to trust. And you can't see at first. You've got to need it, and then you see how it all fits together. Don't assume from the initial stuff how it is. And it's incredible how the water in baking bread is the moisture, the liquid. It's so exact, it's precise, and little tiny bits can make a huge difference. Very cool perception.
Well,
But anyway, we'll get too
but
much
you
into
didn't. But you
baking.
didn't.
But
Well, no, but you didn't finish your statement there when you said things. We have to trust that things are enough. But then my mind went to because there's always more.
exactly,
So,
exactly. All right. So I wanted to just last week the theme was misapplication of goodness, but I just wanted to actually go over it because we talked about it, yes, but I had a whole long story last week that took the whole session, so we didn't actually go over the slides. So folly is sadly often a result of inappropriate application of goodness. This particular quote, I cannot emphasize how powerful, important, significant, huge, and massive this quote is. Just the concept of inappropriate application of goodness. If you haven't heard it before, you say, wait. Hold on, hold on, sir. What the hell are you guys talking about here? How can you have inappropriate goodness? Isn't goodness always good? Well, yes, but it can also be inappropriately applied. The goodness itself is good, it's just inappropriately applied, right? So much of our folly comes from that. When you're
mhm.
aware of this, the consequence is profound, it's life-changing, right? I literally know of people whose life changed in a few seconds, few minutes, because I shared this concept with them. I said, all your problems come not because you're a bad person, or you're stupid or ignorant, or you got, horrible agendas and motivations. No, all your problems come because you've got too much goodness and you don't know what to do with it. And you apply it inappropriately. Oh, 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 wow. Wow. And then all the dominoes start falling, right? This is most people I know are like this. I know tons of good people, wonderfully awesome good people. Are their lives necessarily smooth and wonderful? No. Do they struggle? Yes. Do they have problems? Yes. Do they get into all sorts of messes? Yes. 99% of the time, it's not because they were being knuckleheads and fools and idiots and bad and horrible and nasty. And all. No, they were being inappropriate with their goodness. They didn't know how to deal with their goodness. So this point that we're talking about here, a huge point, as Sher knows, right, Sher?
Yes.
And you see it
It's
in
yeah.
others as well, right? It's a
Yes.
huge point. So now in the context of anxiety and worry, we have this misapplication of goodness, right? Did you want to say something, Sher?
No, I was also thinking that, the concept of shame is also an inappropriate application of goodness. It's a big one. One that a lot of people experience, and that shame leads into anxiety and worry. So, yeah.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Because so often they want to be good, but they don't know how, and this leads to inappropriate. This leads to the worry,
Right.
anxiety, and worry. Exactly. Not
Right.
necessarily inappropriate application of goodness. They just don't know how to be the good that they want to be. Because so much of our world, because of the superiority paradigm, it presses against being good. Right? If you're good and nice, then you soft and weak and all sorts of nonsense like this. Right? So
Yeah.
not ideal, not a good deal. So very cool. So you saw Bina was saying hi there. I'm sure. I don't know if you saw.
No, I'm not on Facebook. I'm just on my phone.
Oh, okay. All right.
So,
No
but
worries.
hello.
No,
Good
well, yeah,
morning,
you
Miss
can see
Tina.
us. Yeah. Hello, Bina. Hello, Bina. All right. Too wonderful. Too wonderful. And I'm so glad that Norma's here and Jason's here. Very cool. So anybody else listening, like Bina said there, just say hi. It makes a difference. Why is this paused? No, it's not.
Um,
Okay. It's just because it
no,
was not front.
I think it's interesting though, if we, when you're talking about inappropriate application of goodness, I'm really interested in hearing where you're going to go with this today,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Yeah.
I heard somebody earlier talking about how they felt so. They used this interesting word. They said they felt ridiculous in the
Mhm.
aftermath of leaving their situation, because they should, and I'm saying these words deliberately, because they should have known better. So they were feeling all
Yeah.
this massive
So
amounts of shame. And I thought, wow, that is the
exactly,
perfect example of inappropriate
exactly.
application of goodness.
And should combine together.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So they're
Right.
taking
So
all of this, knowing that
wonderful.
they are a good person, but
Exactly.
then they're
Exactly.
applying it to themselves inappropriately. So
Exactly.
I'm really
Ex-
interested to hear where you're going to go with all
yeah.
this today.
Yeah. Wonderful. And I'll keep that example in mind, and then we'll connect it all. We'll make it relevant and pertinent. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful connectivity. All right. So we have misapplication of goodness. If we don't worry about dangerous and troublesome possibilities, we believe this makes us bad and uncaring people.
Hmm.
Of course, it's not true. But this is a typical belief of those who worry and are anxious, right? If we don't worry about dangerous and troublesome, I'm talking about worrying about, crime in general, and not specific to you, and you're worrying about famine in the world and stuff like this, right? They feel they have to worry about bad things. Otherwise, they're not a good person. They're a bad and uncaring person. That's not true at all, right? So this is a very, very powerful misapplication of goodness. We are trying to be good by worrying, but it's sadly not the only option available to us, as we shall see later. Nonetheless, it's most helpful to understand, and underlying motivation is us trying to be good, but unfortunately in an inappropriate way. So now we have to say, whoa, wait a second. We need to find other ways of being good rather than thinking we're being good by worrying and being anxious, right?
Hmm.
At least about things that are dangerous and troublesome possibilities, just in general, right? I mean, a lot of stuff that you can find to worry about if you really want to, right? And worry pots, as I call them, sorry, worry pots, but you are, they find all sorts of stuff to worry about that they don't need to worry about. Right. So when we've grown up where we don't, and thus negative prohibitions and behavior are the predominant way, and we're told to be good, it's no wonder we have negative associations with how to be good. Right? Why is there a slide missing here? No. Okay. This seemed a little bit there. All right. Anxiety and worry are such ways. Understanding they are misguided attempts at doing and being good greatly assists us in understanding what these two imposters of caring are. Right. The two imposters here now being anxiety and worry. Right. Masquerading as caring. Why? Because we think we should. And this leads to the next point. Right. Now we come to pressures of should. That's why I wanted to do them, because they're so intimately connected, as Sher's example of somebody said, well, I should have known better, right? Or what did they say again? Is that what they said?
Yeah, they should have known better.
Right.
We say that
Well,
to ourselves a lot. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe they should have, but again, if you think now, of the things you don't know in the future, uh, right this minute, right this minute, I'm not going to know things that I kind of would have liked to have known in the future. So after whatever happens, I said, well, I'll look back and said, well, I didn't know. So, but then can you say, I should have known? How? Can I prepare right now for that? Well, yes, I can make efforts to improve my awareness and my understanding and everything, but I can't prepare for specifics because one of a zillion, billion, trillion things can happen, right? So how
Right.
possibly know? So this is just foolishness. We have to accept that stuff is going to know that we're not prepared for. I'm sorry, stuff is going to happen that I don't know what to do and I'm not prepared for. So be it. I'm going to trust that I'll maybe figure it out in the time or adapt or whatever. I'm going to trust that I'm going to be impeccable, do my best, in other words, in the circumstances. And that's all we can do, right? To be impeccable. And that's why
Right.
impeccability is so, so powerful, right? Because it frees us from this burden of saying, well, I can't know everything. If I'm being impeccable, I make my best efforts. And in my experience, and yours too, sure, right?
Yeah.
Especially lately. If we are impeccable, despite not having answers, despite not knowing what to do, things work out. It's incredible. The universe tends to help us, right? Now we
Mm-hmm.
just have to persist sometimes, and you have to be patient and diligent. But that's part of your impeccability, right? Being patient, being deliberate, being persistent, being thorough, being scrupulous, all part of your impeccability. But let's come back to this pressure of should, right? Anxiety and worry are so often a should. This automatically makes them seem to be a good. And here we come to the danger of a should. When we believe we should do something, it's automatically associated with being good. Right? Well, that's what should
Right.
means. If you should do something, you should do it. Why? Because it's good. But unfortunately, should has become corrupted. And also should gets misapplied. Like I should be worried and anxious about stuff to show that I'm caring. This is a should that comes from your ego, not from actual inherent goodness, right? It's good for your ego, yes, but it's not good in itself, right? Because, well, it makes your ego look like you're a caring person and you're a nice, wonderful person. That's just ego BS. It doesn't mean you actually are. It just makes you look like you are. So it's a false flag. It's a false good.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. This is the
Yeah.
point that I'm making here. We want to develop this contextual awareness to see that things inside the bubble can seem good, but then you zoom out a little bit and you say, like with my bread machine, right? When you actually can, analyze that the stuff in there, look past the surface, you say, oh, there's milk and water and butter underneath, and there's also sugar and salt. Okay. And then you see a heating element, and oh wow, there's a lot more on here than what I first initially perceived, right? So this is how it is when it comes to should and also to good. Yes, a good, something that's good in a particular context isn't necessarily good in a larger context. For instance, more is better. Yeah, sometimes, but actually more better is maybe a really bad example here because it's kind of seldom that more is actually better, right? It's very
Yeah.
seldom. I mean, take most of the things that are just my simple things like in my day-to-day. Well, I'm going to have breakfast. I make some toast or whatever, and I put some butter on there. Oh, more is better. Let me put on more butter. Right? You please try that at home. Try more is better when it applies to butter and see how much butter you can actually eat. No, more with butter is terrible. I know very few people who can eat butter just like raw butter, right? Just eat it like that.
Right.
So more is not better. It kills your sandwich when you put too much on it. It's actually quite dreadful, right? Same thing with you add sugar to your tea or coffee. Well, try more is better. Just keep heaping it in there. It makes it undrinkable, right? Salt, same thing. Too much salt, terrible. So in our very simple daily things, more is not better. Well, take sleep, take sex. People say, oh, I love sleeping. Yeah, but we sleep too much. That's not good. Sex. Oh, I love sex. Yeah, do too much and see what happens to you. Right. So there's lots of things that don't apply to more is better. As in my experience, more is better doesn't apply them. But we believe this. And this is the danger of should. When you've come to believe that, well, more is better, it should be so, you start to do absurd and ridiculous things. And we see this in our culture. I mean, just with plastic surgery, look how people get carried away with more is better sometimes to absurd lengths, right? And they become so preposterous in their physicality, they can even not hardly move, right? So It's astonishing. It's astonishing. So we have to really pay attention to this should and our assumptions, right? So anxiety and worry are so often a should. We get trained that you should be anxious and worry. Why? I mean, really, why? But when you think of it, when you were a kid, right? Well, you got to be worried. Exams are coming. Well, you should be worried. I don't know. It's just like it's not even said in such a direct way. It's just sort of communicated, and you just absorb this that this is what you're supposed to do. But why? What does it help you? Your brain power is now being diverted into anxiety and worry rather than on learning and growing and remembering and whatever the stuff you need to prepare for your exam. You're just siphoning off. It's like on your computer to say, well, you know what, my computer, I need my computer. I'm preparing for the computer for a test and I need all the processing power. I need all the memory. But wait a second, let me start running these two additional programs here, anxiety and worry. And well, let me use up more of my processing power and my RAM and my memory for this. You're making your computer less effective, right? So no, there's no should to it. So anxiety and worry is not a good program at all, right?
Right.
So this automatically makes them seem good because of the should. That,
Mhm.
after all, should is a good we must do. Understanding this association and what's implied by it is fundamental to understanding our connectivity to worry and anxiety. Often we simply do what we feel we should, like worry, just because we are not aware of any other options. Lack of available options combined with default conditioning restricts what we do without us even realizing it. So this is the key point that this program is
Right there.
about, of course, awareness, right,
Showing
Sure?
you options. Yep, showing you options.
Showing
The,
your options, showing there are more options than anxiety and worry. Exactly. We
yes,
do
yes,
because we don't know any different. And I was just talking about this earlier with Jessica. We lose out by default because we don't know any better. Now, that person that you were talking about, they said, man, I should have known better. Well, this is life. We lose out because we don't know better. Yes, but that doesn't mean that you should have known better, right? Now, if
yes.
this is something that you had been aware of and you did know all the details, but for whatever reason you didn't do it, and let's say in the moment, well, I kind of, but let's say you were too timid or you were too shy or you didn't want to step up or whatever, some crappy reason. Okay, then you can feel a bit bad about it, right? But that's part of your
Right,
learning. Your learning,
right,
right? Always,
right.
everything
I
is
mean,
learning. Always.
I was going to say, I made this point the other day because there's a respectable young man who does appreciate Einstein. And
Oh,
so I had brought up the example that, Einstein believes, or his quote, or he quoted somebody, anyways, about how the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting
yeah,
different results. Um,
right.
that made a huge point because we were talking about
Yes.
should. I was
Yes.
trying to help the understanding of should. And so that seemed to make a point that seemed to hit home.
Wonderful.
But then when I look at it, when I'm looking at this particular program that you're doing here, all these words keep coming into my head. It's all based on conditioning. Our shoulds are based on conditioning,
Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
based on unawareness. Now, how are we going to know what needs to change? Well, to me,
Yes.
anyways,
Yes.
that's the big question: is how do we know? How do we know that we
Yes.
need to change something?
Exactly. Exactly. How do we know when we need to do something? In other words, how do we know when we need to learn or when we need to change?
Yep.
That's what you're
Yes.
asking, yes?
Yes.
When what we are doing isn't working,
Hmm.
that's when.
Exactly. Now, to come to that awareness, it's like how many times do you have to stub your toe before you realize, oh, I either
It's not
shouldn't take that
working.
path or I need better shoes. Yeah.
Exactly. Or walking around in the dark with my eyes closed doesn't work.
Yeah. Right.
It doesn't actually make
But
any
it,
difference if you walk around in the dark with your eyes closed, but nonetheless.
right. So that takes it back to, okay, well, we need to be aware. Well, we can't force awareness. We can't teach awareness, as we've been discussing. So
Exactly.
how do you get the
Exactly.
average Joe or the average child or somebody to say, oh, this isn't working. I'm going to have to do something different.
by asking that question.
Is this working
Is
for you?
this working?
Yeah.
Are you getting what you are trying to do, or is it succeeding? Is it working? By asking that
Right.
question, right? So questions are very powerful when it comes to awareness generation, because
Yes,
you
it
are
does.
making something obvious. That it's obvious. Once it's obvious, once you ask that question, oh, it's not working. They never thought about it's working or not. It's very obvious to you from the outside, but inside that bubble, it's not obvious. So by
Yes.
asking the question, you immediately make something obvious. And a good example of this, and also to make it a little bit more complex here, and to add some extra layer to it, this can now also apply to queuing, right? And when we have this bubble popping with a question, sometimes it can have profound effects. All right, so you take two kids, or a couple of kids, a little group, or typically boys, and they're up to some kind of mischief, right? But they don't think it's mischief. They just, you see them and they're in a bubble, they're laughing and fooling and doing whatever. Let's just assume they well, to give an example, seeing if a cat always lands on its feet, right? And they're throwing the cat up and they're spinning the cat. And, I'm using this example because I did this when I was a little kid. And I came across my brother and he was throwing the cat up, and as well, the cat's always supposed to land on its feet, right? I was very young at the time. And I watched him and I said, well, he said, is this true? And he says, well, it seems like it. And I said, no, I bet I can make the cat not land on its feet. And I succeeded. Well, okay, it's a horrible story, but it's the power of unawareness and being caught in a bubble, right? I mean, I spun the cat in such a way that the poor thing landed on its back. But anyway, it survived and ran off, and it left us alone after that. But my point is, like, when you're in that bubble, if somebody had come along in that moment when I was doing this, my brother and I, and we thought this was just too fascinating, and we were having lots of fun doing this, right, in our idiot nonsense unawareness bubble. But if somebody had come along, my mother had come along and said, what are you doing? Immediately in that moment, the bubble pops that we're doing. Her tone of voice and the question implies, cues us that, oh, we're doing something that's not so good. Then we, in our brains, we think back on what we're doing. Oh, yeah, now that you mentioned it, well, that wasn't very nice on the cat. Oh, crap. Well, now I'm in trouble. Now I know that I did something, and now I feel all guilty. And now the person who said, what are you doing, sees my guilt and knows that I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing, right? And now I get into trouble. But what am I really getting into trouble for? I'm getting into trouble for being unaware, right? It's not actually right there to punish the kid, because I've already come aware that I wasn't doing it. Am I going to do it again? No, because I'm aware that it was wrong. So it's very powerful, though, how quickly this can happen. And just by a question, simple questions have the power to transform and bring awareness, right? So that's right. To answer your question there, particularly when you tie that question to self-interest of some kind. Are you getting what you want? Are you succeeding? Yeah. What are you doing? I mean, that question, what are you doing? Very, very powerful. Yes, Norma.
I was aware of the answer to that question, but I was asking it out loud for the benefit of others. That they could get that.
Correct. Yeah, it's for benefit of the program. Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's wonderful. And it's very powerful. It's so powerful, the question. So yeah, I'm explaining it as if you're asking, because that helps me. Oh, yes, Jessica. Oh, early meeting end. Oh, yeah, brilliant. So this is a marvelous point here, that we can get into these pressures of should simply because we don't have anything else and we're not aware of them. So very, 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 very powerful awareness and understanding. Most awesome. Most wonderful. Hello, Jessica. Did you have a good meeting? I'm assuming.
Yes, hello. I had a good meeting. I'm still outside my work, but just wanted to I got a promotion, so I'm just like, okay.
We've got to celebrate. Yes, it's a big deal, your promotion, right? I was sharing with somebody earlier. Oh, Bina was on Zoom before this, and I was saying to Bina, that you got a promotion, and to me, you got a promotion because of your impeccability. That's why you got a promotion,
I'd
because
agree.
you were
I'd
being
agree.
disciplined, you were being responsible, you were being thorough, you're being aware, you're being caring, you're being considerate, but not overly so. You weren't being inappropriately caring, right? Like other people who did this and they were applied inappropriate application of goodness, and it caused them trouble.
Yes,
And well, so all of this is a consequence of you being impeccable, correct?
very
Right,
much
Jessica?
so. Yes, very much
Exactly.
so.
Now, also, we also want to understand that impeccability is an ever ongoing process. Just because I've been impeccable doesn't mean I can learn more to add to my impeccability, right?
Yep.
Impeccability is doing the best with what you have, right? So let's assume that I'm a carpenter or a house builder or whatever, and I've only got a hammer and a saw. Well, I can build a house with maybe just my hammer and my saw, but well, it would be really nice if I had a drill. This would really help. Instead of hammering in my screws, I can actually screw them in, with a screwdriver. Okay, or screwdriver. Okay, so my point is there are additional tools that make our lives easier. So impeccability is all about that. You can be impeccable with what you have and you make do the best, but that doesn't mean that those things are ideal. So our impeccability is an always ongoing process. So of course, we've been talking about
Yes.
pressures of should, and understanding should in the context of unawareness, how we just default to having these ideas and beliefs of things we should do, like we should worry and we should be anxious. Why? Because, well, that's what good people do. Or why? Because, well, there's a problem. And if you don't worry, I don't know, they never really finish the why. If you ask them why, they can seldom explain why. It's just something that they've come to believe. And the reason this comes as a should is because people who did worry and anxious and did so out of fear and lack of confidence and insecurity, crappy reasons, in other words, and somebody said to them back then, well, why are you worrying? They're not going to say, well, then the question made them aware. Well, I'm actually being crappy. Oh, I'm being fearful. I'm being timid. I'm being whatever. And so then they made up a reason. Well, I'm caring. You see what I mean? And now they started pushing this as a justification for really being crappy with their worrying and anxiety. And they sold it because they had big egos and they don't want to look foolish. They sold it as being a should. Well, you should worry. It's bullshit. It's all nonsense, right? So this is very important to understand. Now, of course, not all shoulds are negative. No, some shoulds are appropriate shoulds, but it's unfortunately like everything else. You can use a screwdriver as a murder weapon, as a fantastic stabbing weapon. Is that what it's designed for? No. Was should designed for this kind of abuse? No. So when we understand that things aren't necessarily used the way they should be used, right? And this is the magic of should and the power and the horror of should. It's such a complicated term, and it's very hard to kind of unravel it, because should is inherently a good thing, but it can be abused. And that's quite hard to understand sometimes, or comprehend, or just process that should can be used negatively, right? And used as a manipulation tool as well, right? It can be abused very profoundly. Very, very big deal. So, sure. Tell me the story
Yes.
of the person again, of what they did, the one with and share it again, just like you said it earlier.
Yeah. It was just somebody I was listening to, how we scroll through and listen to a post. I happened across a post where a person was talking about how they should have known better. They should have seen
Mm,
the signs. They should have gotten out sooner. With all this information that we have out there,
yeah,
why did they stay? Well, in my mind, I didn't respond or I didn't post a comment or anything, but I did get to thinking about, wow, that was such an inappropriate application of goodness, because
yes, yeah,
they were feeling so guilty
correct,
about what they didn't know. They
correct,
just
correct,
didn't know. They were believing in the
yeah,
power of should.
yeah,
They were
correct,
believing in that negative context that you were
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
I got to wondering about, well, when we get into that situation, and here's
yeah,
part two of that question,
yeah,
I think it's really important that we understand that
yeah,
we don't always, we just don't always have that awareness of what's going on
correct,
around us.
correct,
We just
correct,
don't.
correct, correct.
I speak a
And
lot
being,
about
yeah,
being, I was going to say, I speak a lot about being and living deliberately unbound, but I'll tell you
exactly.
what, that takes a massive amount of energy. And I'm not perfect at it yet. I'm still practicing it. I'm living
Yes,
it, but
yes,
But what it
Yes,
means to do is to walk around 24/7 in a state of mindfulness. That's a lot. That is a lot.
exactly,
But
exactly,
I
exactly.
don't walk around anymore telling myself, well, I should have known better, or I should do this,
Correct,
or I should. No,
correct, correct,
now it's
correct,
now it's
correct.
instead of, like you were
Exactly,
talking about, what's my intent? What's their intent? I
exactly,
look at
exactly, exactly. And what else you're not walking around 24/7 doing is you're not walking around 24/7 in complete and total unawareness and in bubble awareness, correct?
right,
You're not
exactly.
necessarily aware 24/7 or mindful 24/7, but you're not
Right,
unmindful 24/7 either, correct?
right, right. No, I mean,
So, so it's
I'm
changing,
fully
it's
aware that,
changing,
yeah,
changing.
exactly. Changing the choice to change. And this is
Yeah,
all choice. This is where deliberate
exactly,
comes in. And
exactly,
Norma asked a beautiful
exactly,
question the other day.
exactly,
What does all that
exactly,
mean? Well,
exactly.
it's
Yeah,
choice. And
we
maybe that I could have really responded to Norma in hindsight with one word, that dear heart, this is just choice. It's deliberate living is choice. It's
yeah,
choosing what we
yeah.
want to pay attention to, not what we should pay attention to.
Exactly, exactly. And then it starts to get more wonderful when we start getting into attunement and things like that. And then the whole thing starts to, but that's a long thing, right? It all builds,
It is.
it all builds. It's like the baking of the bread where we started, right?
Yeah.
Is that you
Yep.
put the ingredient, well, you first get them together, right? And so you first have to have clarity of intent. That's where Way of Impeccability starts. Clarity of intent. Well, what am I
Yes.
going to do? Well, I want to bake a bread or bake something. I get the ingredients. Well, I don't have the ingredients for the bread, but well, I can make a tortilla or whatever. All right. So appropriateness, when we have our intent and then we see what we have and then we start mixing, we start kneading and we make it together. We let it rise, we let it process, we think it through to the end. Then we bake it, which is the testing, the self-proof. So these are all techniques and strategies we have for dealing with unawareness. Now, unawareness is the natural state of the world and it's necessary.
Yeah.
Why is it? Oh, wait a second. Aren't you telling us unawareness is we want to avoid unawareness? We don't want to be aware, and we should be aware. Well, yes, but you cannot avoid having unawareness. Why? We have to start with unawareness because I can't give you, nobody can give you awareness. If they give you awareness, it's not
Right.
awareness, it's a program. It's by
Yes.
default, not real awareness, it's BS awareness. So the only way to get to real awareness is to do it from unawareness. Basically, you've got to blunder around in the dark until you find, like it's like, this dark room and you're just bumping against the wall. Oh, here's a door. Oh, wonderful. Okay. And I get out. And that's how it is, right? So a lot of it is us just keeping going, making an effort to do our best in whatever situation we are, and then figure it out from there. And as we get a little bit more aware, we acquire tools and the thing starts getting better and better and better, right? So, but in the beginning, though, you're kind of on your own, and we just have to keep our fingers crossed when, for most people, that at some point they're going to grab onto a little bit of awareness. Now, in life, generally, this seems to happen. But, I've met people who have gone all their lives and they never moved out of that stage of, living in that bubble, right? So they didn't
Yeah.
get out of that. But yes, where honesty is so important, right? And if I go back to the pre-programmed program and we have those 9 tasks of doing when you do these programs, number 1 is honesty and self-honesty. If you're honest and you're doing stuff, if you're honest and self-honest, you say, but this isn't working. Right? I may not know how or whatever, but if it's not working, you say, well, it's not working. I've got to do stuff differently. I have no idea what, but I know that it's not working. And because it's not working, there's got to be a different way. If you're honest, though, you start looking because it's not working, right? And also hypocrisy, right? You don't accept hypocrisy if you're honest. So much in life happens because we just accept stuff, accept because we don't want to be honest and face this. The awful truth is it's not working and I don't know how to fix it, but we don't want to face that. So what if I don't know how to fix it? Doesn't mean I can't figure out how to fix it. Find, ask, learn. See, then the moment I accept that it's not working and I don't know why it's not working, that's when I become aware that I'm unaware and that I need to be more aware. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right
Yes.
there, your whole world changes.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
But you know
it's
what?
not
Yeah, but
working.
it's not I was going to say, now don't be fooled that this is not an overnight process. This isn't
No,
a
absolutely
way of
not. Oh,
Yeah, I was
no,
gonna say
exactly.
it's definitely not Jiffy Lube. I will
No,
say
no,
that.
no, no, exactly. There's no overthinking in this. This is just you figuring it out and you coming to a
Yeah.
profound awareness that, man, okay, it's not a fun awareness initially to say, man, it's not working and I don't know. You just want to cry. Well, okay, suck it up and this is the reality. But once you start to realize, man, hang on a second, learning is actually fun. Oh, oh, where did I get this idea that learning wasn't fun? Sorry, it's one of those shoulds. Learning is stressful, and we get it from school. Like the way you taught at school, they make learning totally unfun. Wow, no, come on, man, this is terrible. When you were a little kid and you played games, what were those games? They were all learning. Every single
Mhm.
little game you played as a kid, you were learning. Learning and play is the same thing. Right. And as we get older, unfortunately, we disassociate the two. But to me, learning is always fun. Don't we have fun, sir, when we do our sessions? Jessica,
Yeah.
don't we have fun when we're learning?
Yes,
Of course we
always.
do.
It's incredible fun. It's like, man, this is so awesome. This is so cool. Learning is fun. Play is fun. Play is learning. So this is not
Wait.
a should that learning is a negative. No, get that idea out, throw it out of your head right away. How can it not be
Wait.
fun when you enhancing yourself, you adding to yourself, you're making more, you're making yourself more able, you're making yourself more competent, you're making yourself more aware. How is this not fun? Makes your life easier, right?
Um, learning to play. And I'm
Exactly.
using that word, that sentence exact. Learning to play, not adult play, but a childlike imaginary play.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the first person to say that that's really, really, really uncomfortable. I had to use every single tool I ever learned about
I
anxiety or
love this.
worry.
Yes.
Going
Yes.
through, sitting down, learning how to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm still working
Yeah,
on
I remember that, Cher. Actually, sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but I do remember that happening. And I'm like, no, just breathe. It's not as tough as you think it is. Trust. Just trust.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
it.
So
It's like
yes.
sticking your hand into a jar of peanut butter or something. It feels gooey, feels gushy. That
Yeah.
we love eating peanut butter and we know that it goes on a spoon or a knife, right? No,
Yeah.
stick your hand in there. That's a whole different story.
Yeah, it's so brilliant. It's so brilliant. But when
Pretend it's mud.
yeah,
Ugh.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It feels like mud. Yeah, it does. It does. Feels a
Ew,
lot like mud.
ew, 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 ew.
Yeah. When we realize, for instance, things like this, we realize how much we've accumulated nincompoopery, right? But the wrong
Oh my
kind of
gosh, tons
nincompoop.
of it.
Because play, you need the positive side of nincompooperi. That's the magic of nincompooperi. Don't throw all nincompooperi out. Just throw the ineffective nincompooperi out. But when we realize as adults that we can't play like children, we realize it's only because we've accumulated all this baggage, this nincompooperi baggage. But throw that away and leave the raw nincompooperi like a child who can celebrate being a nincompoop. And that's what childish play is. Celebrating being a nincompoop. Yes?
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. How cool is that? How cool is that? Jason
Anyway.
and Oma, are you still with us?
It basically ties in, and so this is what it reminds me of, is it ties in with also being okay with feeling awkward or being awkward. That's
Yeah. Yes.
a conversation Sil and I had earlier, and
Yes.
you can cue that it's not that it's uncomfortable, hence making somebody else uncomfortable too. And it's a
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you want
Yeah.
other people to like we tell children all the time, play, pretend, use your imagination, it's great. But then when it comes to them wanting us to do it, we're like
Exactly. Exactly.
so
That's
Hypocrite.
me. That's
Hypocrites.
me.
that's
She just
that's
described me.
the best phrase to say that if we don't know how to is say, can you
Yeah.
teach me?
Yeah.
I want to
Yeah.
learn. Can you teach me how to play?
Right. Right. Right.
No.
And just to recap a little bit here, talk a
Why
little
does
bit
that
of
create so much like inside of me? I don't know. That's wild. That's something to
habits,
explore.
habits, sure. And we're
Mm.
going over this with habits in doing Way-of-Impeccability with Jessica. That was where we were at this morning on module 1 session 2, focuses on habits. Habits are mechanisms of unawareness. You think of a habit in that
Right.
way. Oh shit. Oh, wow. Oh, man. Oh, that's too horrible. This is like the worst horror movie that I'm in. We're talking about horror movies. Now, think of those horror movies. Now, I don't care much for horror movies, but Jessica says she likes them. And we've all seen at least a few, so we know. What happens when you're watching the horror movie and let's say the phone rings? What do you do? What do you do? Don't pick up the phone, you fool. Don't pick up the bloody phone. What the hell's the matter with you? Come on,
I
pick up
know.
the phone.
Wait,
What's going to
wait.
come on?
Yeah, and when you hear the music, run. When you hear the music, run.
Right.
Dumb.
Right, exactly. But my point is, why are they picking up the phone? Because of habit. They
Yeah.
unaware. They unaware. So the habit, when we combine habit with unawareness, we see how powerful this understanding is that habits are really unawareness mechanisms that repeat and loop, right? That come up, that are cued by circumstance, association, and so on. But when you make this association between habit and unawareness, it's like, holy moly. And now when you watch that horror movie, like most people, you have the awareness and they don't. That's why you keep shouting at it. And I think that's why people like horror movies, because it makes them feel like they know and makes them feel a little bit more in control of their lives because they can see what they know that they don't know, right? So that they know not to do this stuff. So it's very powerful in that context. But when we look at our life and see habits, we say, oh my goodness, this is quite a horror movie. It's habits which keep us unaware and keep us in a negative situation. So that's really what we want to do, is to learn to be aware of our habits and shift them into capital H habits, which is deliberate habits, like the habit of being deliberately aware, the habit of paying attention, the habit of thinking things through to the end, the habit of perspective shifting. I mean, I can go on, right? As I was saying earlier to Jessica, there's lots of things we can do that are different, many options, right? The habit of being impeccable, and so on, so on, so on. Lots of new habits, but these are all deliberate habits, not unaware habits. And the habits, when I'm being impeccable, I have to be aware to be impeccable. I can't just mindlessly be impeccable, because it's always going to change depending on the circumstance. So when we get into the habit of being aware and being deliberate, then we can't get into those unaware habits. Now we have new habits, which are power habits, right? Capital H habits. Very, very, very different. Very powerful. Very powerful. So Norma and Jason, if you're still here, Bina, please share if you have any questions, any ideas, any thoughts,
So I actually have a question.
Yeah.
No, I was talking to my sorry, here. Okay. No, I do have a question. So as you were talking, I was thinking back about why I like horror movies so much. And I think it's because that suspense, that, not only just suspense, but like, what's going to happen, but you're like, I want to see this play out. I want to see what happens, and can that correlate with also like why, like used to place myself in certain situations because of that adrenaline rush, that suspense of it, like
Or the control.
Yeah.
I have it. I have kind of an interesting, Jessica, I'm just going to bring you back to a memory really quick. Think of Virginia Beach and a white mask that glowed in the dark, and three boys who loved
We're
to
not doing
carry.
that. We're not going there. No, ma'am.
Okay.
We're not going to that
Are you
white mask.
sure? Okay, no, hold on a second, because if you recall, you and I were the ones in the bathroom who turned the table on those boys.
Oh,
And
true.
we're the ones who came out and scared the daylights out of them with that white mask, because they were so busy terrorizing you and me. And we
But then
saw
they
three
terrorized me even
boys.
more after that.
Oh, okay. I don't remember that part, but I just remembered that night when those boys got their comeuppance because of the constant, scaring you with it. And I was like, all right, we're going to teach these guys a lesson here, what it feels like. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Very interesting.
So no, so
But,
she felt really empowered after that, for quite some time, against these boys who were, fairly bullyish to their little sisters.
yeah.
So.
Oh yeah, they were very much so.
Jessica, if I apply capital H hearing to what you were saying about why you watch the horror movies, is because it gives you some measure of this feeling that what's going to happen, and that you kind of can see it coming, right? So it makes you feel more aware and more in control, thus, of your life.
Yes.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting how that
Yep.
awareness comes from that, right? When
Mhm.
we actually face these awful truths and we realize that, you know what, you can get through it. Maybe the people in the movie don't get through it, but you do. Yes. Yeah. There's a big
Very much
value
so.
to that.
And you can play it out and like, and it correlates a lot with also thinking things through to the end, because you're thinking it through the end of how,
Ah,
the different
yeah,
possibilities of it playing out and what it's gonna, what the
ex-
ending result would be.
exactly. Exactly. It's fear management, in other words, right?
Yes.
You watch a horror movie, it's fear management. That's what it is, right? Because if your life is full of that stuff and you see it in the movie, it allows you to process and deal and think about it and look at it from an overview perspective and understand it. So yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily in itself the most fun thing, but there's a positive value that comes out of it, and that's very positive. So yeah, again, it's a deeper understanding that not things aren't always as obvious as we think they are. Life is complex, right? And we do things for complex reasons. Very powerful to understand. So yeah, awareness, all of it, awareness. So this point of should, I actually want to end a bit early today. Lots of stuff happening today, but then we'll move on to distortions of guilt next time. Uh, this point of should, though, I really would recommend, and I think it's probably in tasks and exercises later on, is that start looking in your day, every day. Just look at the things that happen and look at why you are doing things, and ask yourself, where's the should involved? And you're going to be astonished at how often you are doing things simply because there's some should. And then you ask, well, does the should make sense? And not always, right? So you're going to be really amazed at how often should comes into it and how often should isn't actually a positive, right? So pay attention to should and watch other people and say, well, why did you do that? Well, I'm supposed to. Supposed to is just another version of should. Yeah. So just a variation on the theme, right? And how they act according to these default ideas and beliefs of shoulds that aren't really shoulds. Very, very powerful awareness. Very, very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. Um, Anything to add before we go? Sure, Jessica,
Oh,
Norma,
no, no, I'm
Mina,
good.
Jason, you guys are still there. Anybody listening? Make a comment. Make a comment if say something before we go. Jessica, you muted.
Okay. Yeah, I muted myself. I apologize. No, I don't
Oh
have
no.
anything else to add. I was listening to everything, and I think it's very
Wonderful.
enlightening, to be honest with you,
Yes, it's very
Yeah.
and
powerful
fun.
stuff. Very powerful stuff. Yes, and fun. Exactly, and fun. So this when we combine the misapplication of goodness and should, it's really they are very intertwined. That's why I went over that again, because should so often is a misapplication of goodness. We think we should worry. Based on what? Just because somebody said you should,
Or
but you think you're doing a good thing. It's misapplication of goodness. So should is so often a misapplication of goodness. Yes, Jessica?
or we think we should earn the respect of others by empathizing with them too much.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, this is, when it comes to the should of the superiority paradigm, like you should have status, you should be important, you should boss people. No, none of that is necessarily a should. It's been made so by people to whom that is important. And they know, well, they sort of, being a bit crappy, and they want to justify their crappiness by making it into a should. No, sorry, that's not necessarily so. Right? So much of life stuff, like you should be famous. Says who? Why? Based on what? No, absolute nonsense. I don't particularly want to be famous because, man, you're going to be bothered by people. You can't go out in peace in public, and all this. No, thank you very much. I value my privacy much more than that. I have no interest in being. This is not a positive for me at all. It's a negative. But to some people, it's a should, and they pursue it because it's a should, and it gets them into trouble, right? So should, very, very important. Understand what's valuable to you, not because it's supposed to be for somebody else. Then maybe for them, yes. I'm not saying, if you don't want to be famous, go ahead. If that's what makes you happy, fine. But do it for the
Mhm.
right reasons. Do it because of should. Right? Do it because it's really legitimate and genuine for you. Yeah.
Yes, most definitely.
Not a should, not a should. Yeah. Jessica, you work with recovering drug addicts, yes?
Yes, I do. I work with recovering
I
drug
want to
addicts.
ask a really potent, yeah, right? Because you also know it from your own personal experience, right? So you know it from inside, and now you're working from outside. How many of those people are drug addicts because of should?
All of them. All of them. And it's crazy
Can you
to
just
even
pause there a
hear about.
second? Sorry,
Yeah.
I just want to sort of bow my head in respectful appreciation of that fact. You said all of them, not most of them, all of them. So
Yep.
I want to really let this sink in, the horror of should. Now, somebody who's not aware of the ins and outs, they might not make the connection of why it came about, but it doesn't matter, right? Just to be aware, you can go and look in your own life and see how many people are in horrible situations because they thought this is what they should do, right? So it's super powerful. So yeah, I just want to let that sink in a moment, how those people are there because of should. Now, go ahead, Jessica. Go ahead. Say what you want to say.
Oh no,
And then,
and I was also saying, all of them, and it's astonishing to even hear about how their beliefs and worrying about others constantly and not taking that time for themselves that's necessary to replenish their own energy. They worry about other people, they have anxieties, they deal with a lot of anxiety, and every single one of them gets diagnosed with anxiety disorder, and worries, and they worry about their families all the time, and you see them worry about so many people other than themselves.
right.
And and that I should be out there helping my family, I should be out there,
Mhm.
Exactly.
making something of myself, and I'm like, really, should you? Because
Yeah.
I mean, whose responsibility is that really?
Exactly. And also, the underlyingness is that they believe it's their responsibility to fix the world, essentially,
Mhm.
right? They should
Oh
make the
yeah.
world a better place. You should do this. You should make it good. You should be helping. You should be doing stuff for others. You should be all the stuff. Should. And in the end, they get so overwhelmed that the whole system implodes and collapses. And then, well, in again, what do you do when your world implodes and collapses and it gets too much for you? Well, that's when you take drugs.
Yep.
Now, it's not ever said that you should take drugs, but by implication, all right, it's like, well, that's what you should do then when you're completely screwed up and you don't know what else to do. So it's all should piling on top of each other, and it creates this horrible mess. And that's how come they are there because of should, right? Because they
Yes.
thought at some point that this is the solution to their problems. This is what you should do. Of course, it's not, but they believed it. It's just inappropriate should. Inappropriate should.
Yes. As well as an inappropriate application of goodness as
Of
well,
course.
because all of them have a huge heart. Like every single
Yes.
one of them.
Yes. Exactly. Too much, and they don't know how to deal with it. They don't
Yep.
know how to deal
Yeah.
with it. Right. So when we combine inappropriate application of goodness and should, just in those two conceptions, that when you take should as and you put inverted commas around it. Oh, you mean should isn't always, in other words, that implies that it's not always genuine, it's not always legitimate, it's like bogus. That's the quotation mark. And you apply that with
Right.
inappropriate application of goodness. To say, oh, I never really ever considered that goodness needs to be appropriately applied to profound things that we never considered before, we just didn't think of. But when you do think of them, life changing,
Mhm.
profoundly, not only self changing, but life changing. The key is you got to act on it. You got to bake it, people. You got to bake it. Don't leave it half baked. Go and
Yep.
act on the should. Go and act on the inappropriate awareness. Change, go and test it, apply it, implement it. Like you saw Jessica earlier. She was explaining something about awkwardness, and she was practicing her own expression of not being awkward to express. And it didn't come out as smooth as she may have wanted, but she was persisting on that. And she didn't cue that she was awkward because she shifted to not being awkward about expressing things that she's not 100% fluid and clear about yet. But in the expression, she gets to be more clear and more fluid. So it feeds on itself, right? But if she was all awkward about it and cued us to be awkward, then we'd be awkward. She'd feel awkward about making us awkward, and it's a whole mess. Yeah, right, Jessica? So I just want to give you a bit of, a thumbs up there for implementing what we were talking about earlier. Right? You were actually doing it when you talked about awkwardness. Very
Thank
cool.
you.
Very cool. Yeah, that's very awesome. Application, you are baking it there, right? So baking is that testing, it's practicing. Practicing is being deliberately wrong about something and learning from being deliberately wrong, right? When you practice on your instrument, well, I don't know how to do this exactly. I know it's wrong, but I'm going to deliberately do it wrong so that I can figure out what is the right way to do it, right? So this is very profound. When we do this with all of our stuff, that the baking, we put that heat, that pressure on us, to test, to experiment, to explore. This is how we learn. This is how we get the bread in the end, right? Very powerful, very powerful. Yeah. The magic of baking in everyday life.
Extremely powerful.
Connections. Sure, anything before we go?
No, I was just thinking I need to get going because I've got to get school going here. So,
All right, wonderful, wonderful. I'm very thrilled about that Einstein quote, by the way. This is transformative. It's transformative. It's transformative.
yes.
Very magical, very magical. Yes. And you asked, how do we become aware? By that quote, for instance, doing the same thing over and over and getting the same result. Oh man, like I said, if you're honest, you at some point got to say, but hang on, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. This leads to the awareness. The reason you were doing the thing over and over again without realizing it is because you were in a bubble of unawareness, not necessarily insanity. Yes.
Right.
That's why you could loop it over and over again. Like you see animals do this, they just forget and they do, and they come back 2 minutes later and they do the same thing over again. They have no awareness of what went before. So awareness, it just creates itself. You saw that happen in that Einstein question.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
You saw awareness happen. Very profound, very
Yes.
magical. Again, to the power of patience and discipline, perseverance, forbearance, and impeccability. You keep persisting. You are still keeping on persisting and waiting for these moments to happen. You can't make them happen, but you just trust that they're going to happen. Your impeccability leads to resolution. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, very
Yes.
powerful. All right,
Patience
brilliant.
is the
Thank you,
biggest key
everybody,
right
for
now.
being here. Thank you for those who are going to watch the replay, and just do magical, marvelous. All right, bye-bye, Jessica. Bye-bye, Shah. See you next time.
Thanks.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Always a pleasure. Always a joy. Bye-bye. Here we go. Here we go. Bye-bye.